So in Chapter 6, we start to look at problem solving and creativity. As you can tell by the items that were put out in your module this week, there is the problem solving technique that we'll go over in the book, and there's also the Ishikawa fishbone or cause and effect diagram, which is another problem solving technique that I've actually provided some information on, and that your assignment is actually going to use to resolve the problem that I gave you all. So let's go forward. We're on page 145. These are the learning objectives. Understand how personal characteristics influence your ability to solve problems and make decisions, because they do. You may not realize it, but they're who you are and how you are do influence how you approach problem solving and making decisions in your life. Apply the problem solving and decision making steps to complex problems. Summarize the characteristics of creative people. Describe the various ways of improving your creativity. Know the basic steps in critical thinking. Explain how multiple intelligences might help in problem solving and creativity. So let's take a look first at personal characteristics that influence your problem solving ability. Cognitive intelligence, education, and experience all can have a factor on influencing how you approach and go about looking at problem solving. Being intelligent, well-educated, and experienced helps decision making. It always would. I mean, that makes sense. The more experience you have, the more well-educated you are, the more you're able to come up with various ideas to throw out there in terms of problem solving or making decisions. Education improves the problem solving decision making process because it gives you, in many cases, a background of principles and facts to rely on, which help you whenever you're trying to look at working through any kind of a problem to come up with some solution. Emotional intelligence, the big buzzword these days in corporate America. You hear more and more people talking about emotional intelligence. And in fact, there are many managers now, when looking to hire people, that actually look at emotional intelligence versus IQ, and in many cases hire more for emotional intelligence than they do in IQ in some instances. Part of that is because what emotional intelligence brings to the workplace, aside from being excellent at problem solving, they bring a lot of other abilities and skills. Someone with high emotional intelligence is very good at working in teams because they're able to read people very well. They're very social. They're able to also be very have empathy when needed, but they're very good as well as being able to take a problem, work through the steps, and come up with solutions. So they're also very in tune with their own emotions, and in fact they're very good at controlling emotions, and are people that are real good to have on a team, particularly if you're working with somebody or you're working on a situation that is a very emotional one where people have some skin in the game and tend to get emotional. These are the people that can read others' emotions and also keep their own emotions in check. So they're a good person to have on a team that is working on any kind of a problem-solving type of situation in the work environment. They're also just good team members to have on a team because of the way they work with other people. They're considered a big asset. Flexibility versus rigidity. Flexibility thinking leads to original and therefore creative and alternative solutions to a problem. Some people are just very rigid in their thinking. They just come to a viewpoint on something. It's very hard to change that viewpoint. The more flexible you are, the more able you are to basically look at things from different viewpoints or come in with a fresh outlook on something. And that helps because you're able to come up with alternative solutions and things that maybe weren't already thought of when trying to come up with the solution to the problem. Intuition. Effective problem solvers rely on experience-based hunches plus careful analysis. So they use their intuition, but keep in mind that that intuition is, comes from somewhere. They do have experience, and that experience has led them to make certain hunches after looking at the analysis that's been given to them on a problem, and in many cases, based on the proper evaluation, they're able to come up with a very good solution to the problem. Concentration is needed for making good decisions. Well, that makes sense. The more concentration you can give to a problem, or if you're just having to make even a pretty important decision in your personal life, the more you're able to really concentrate, analyze, sit down, look at it, absorb everything that you're looking at, the easier it's going to be for you to come up with a solution to the problem. If you look in your book on page 146, there's a nice little drawing. It shows in the center problem-solving skill, and that's your cognitive intelligence, education, and experience. And then it connects to all these little things that aid in that problem-solving skill. Your intuition comes into it, whether you're flexible versus rigid, whether you have emotional intelligence, and of course the higher degree of that you have, the easier it's going to be for you to do problem solving. Concentration, we're going to look at decisiveness and perfectionism, and that also is in this picture as well. Decisiveness and perfectionism, you must commit to a course of action. The perfectionist might block people from passing along the project, and part of that is that it's never perfect enough. Even though you may come up with a solution, a perfectionist always thinks there's probably a better solution, and if a decision has to be made quickly, this could stop things from moving forward. So you really need to have a person that can be very decisive and make up their mind without necessarily trying to be perfect. But that if the solution will work, or at least let's try it and see if it will, let's put that in place. Risk-taking and thrill-seeking. Okay, high risk-taking and thrill-seeking can be an asset because you're not afraid to try out solutions to your problem that other people may go, oh, I don't know, that's a high risk. Most people are adverse to taking risks, certainly in a workplace environment, and they have a more intense response to loss than gain. This is a person that's like, hey, nothing ventured, nothing gained, let's try it. If it doesn't work, we come back to the drawing board and we try a different solution, an alternative solution, to see if that will resolve our issue. So in many cases, if you're putting a team together to work on some type of problem that is in the workplace, or even if you're in your personal life trying to work through something and it's not something you can deal with yourself, you're trying to run it by some other people to get some viewpoints, you might want to run it by the person that you know that's usually the risk taker, because sometimes they come up with some very interesting solutions that will work and do a good job to whatever the issue is. Also, many people, I think I told you, are adverse to taking the risk. And like I said, in business, there are a lot of people that are just really afraid to take the risk for fear that, if it doesn't succeed, it could be their job on the line. Values of the decision maker come in to play in terms of making decisions and problem solving. Ultimately, all decisions, as we know, because we covered this in Chapter 5, are based on values, such as valuing the well-being of others. So remember that your decisions are based on the values, and your values are based on your morals, and this is how you take action. So depending on what your values are could make a big difference in terms of the decision that you come to in a problem-solving situation. The problem-solving and decision-making steps that are covered in the book, and you will find this on, let me go, on page 150, is basically starting with an awareness of the problem. What is the problem? Then you're going to identify causes and problems that relate to the main problem. And this is when it's good to have a group so that you can brainstorm several different things out there. Then based on looking at all of those things that could possibly create the problem, and maybe several of them do, you're going to want to, eventually you're going to address all things, but you're going to want to break it into one area and work on one area first, or in other words, identify a cause that you think you'll get your most bang for your buck with, and start brainstorming on maybe some creative solutions and alternatives that could resolve that particular problem, or help that particular cause that is creating the main problem. Again, most of this is done in brainstorming in companies. When it's a big problem, it's a group that's pulled together. Brainstorming is done. A lot of times they have an outside facilitator that has actually come in to facilitate the process. This is not something that you can't do on your own in a much smaller way if you're just trying to work through a personal problem in your life. And we've all done that. Sometimes you don't know what way to make the decision, so you kind of write down the pros and the cons, and is there maybe an alternative solution to just going this way or this way. So it's something you can use personally as well. You don't have to have a large group, but if it's a huge issue, and when I worked in the telecommunication industry, sometimes we had big problems that had to be looked at. You want that diversity of people on the team and that diversity of brain power in the room as you're trying to identify possible causes, and also certainly for trying to come up with creative solutions. Once you think you've brainstormed enough of the solutions, then you're going to look at each one of them, and you're going to really take a look at weighing whether, because remember, brainstorming, you just kind of throw anything out. Then you're going to start going through that and weighing, really what's feasible, what's realistic. Some people may throw things out that really, it's a good solution, but it doesn't really, fix this particular cause that you're dealing with, or this particular problem. So you want to really go through and weigh it and look at the different alternatives. And again, with the team, you're going to come to consensus on one alternative that you're going to implement. Again, that's not to say that if there are more than, if there are a couple other good alternatives that might also help, you're not going to throw those away, because as with anything, you're going to implement your alternative, and once it's implemented, after a period of time, you're going to evaluate it to see if it truly has fixed your problem. If it hasn't fixed the problem, then you have to go back to the drawing board. Well, I definitely would go back to one of my alternative solutions that we had all come out with thinking would fix the problem, and implement that. So you have to be aware of all of these, and then it's kind of as you can see by the diagram in your book on 150, you kind of start over again. Once you go through all of this, then you go back and evaluate whether or not this has fixed the problem. If it's fixed the problem, great. If it hasn't, then you have to kind of go through the steps again and implement an alternative solution, and once again see whether or not this is taking care of the issue. So let's take each one of those steps that we just kind of covered in the diagram on page 150 and go into it a little more. The first step, of course, is awareness of the problem, or as some might say, an opportunity. But you need to become aware of it. You can create your own problem to solve or recognize a good opportunity, but you need to figure out what the issue is. And sometimes what you think the issue is or what the problem is really isn't the problem. It's more the symptom. But you just need to make sure that when you start working with the problem that you have identified and you are aware of what it is you're trying to actually resolve. Then you're going to identify causes of the problem. And sometimes that's hard because you really want to get to the root cause again. And again, you could have things that are symptoms, but they're not really the root cause. For example, I have a horrible, horrible cough, so it might be thought that I have a cold. When I go in and really get checked out, we find out that it's not a cold. That was not correct, and the cough is a symptom of a much deeper root cause, which happens to be pneumonia in my lungs. Okay? So you want to make sure you get to the root cause. Sometimes you identify causes and you may have to dig even a little more deeper to do that. And then, of course, you're going to look at the creative alternatives. The more alternatives you generate, the more likely a useful solution persists, which is why it's nice to have a team to do this with, and you just brainstorm and just write down everything and anything that people are throwing out, and then go back and look at everything that you've gathered to try to come up with an alternative solution to the issue. Now, the Ishikawa fishbone is very similar to this. The steps are the same. You have to know what the problem is, and the problem, once you identify it, is the head of your fish. Okay, so you draw your little head, and that's where you put your problem in. Then, from the head, you're going to draw a backbone out, and you're going to draw, for a better word, you're going to draw two kind of big ribs coming off of the fish up above and two below. Sometimes you might, depending on what the issue is, it could be anywhere from 4 to 6 of those major ribs on the fish. And those are like your main categories when you start looking at causes. And so you'll fill in your main categories, and a lot of times, you know, that can be equipment, it can be people, it can be training. They're high-level areas that can cause the problem. Once you have those areas identified, then underneath each of those ribs, you have tiny little bones or pin bones coming out that are additional causes to that particular rib. If, you know, for example, if you were to say that people were the problem, that in this particular situation, that people were the cause, then you might have under the people issue that maybe the cause of the problem is there's not enough people to do the work, and therefore that's what's causing whatever your initial problem is. Or maybe there's no people, no processes in place for the people, etc. They haven't been trained. These are things that would all fall under like your little pin bones. But I don't have a picture of that here because I supplied you guys with the video to look at. They do a nice job of kind of breaking that down. And then I also gave you, you know, a very simplistic assignment where you can use the fish diagram, cause and effect diagram, to break down the problem that I gave you and take a look at that as well. But everything is going to be a little similar. Your head is the problem. Your causes are basically, in the Ishikawa diagram, are going to be all the bones of your fish. And then you're going to brainstorm alternatives and then come up with your solution. So again, both processes work. Sometimes the diagram is easier to see things for people. So it's been around for ages, since the 60s, so a lot of people do use the Ishikawa fishbone diagram when they're working through problem solving and or decision making. Once you come up with all these brainstorming solutions, then you're going to weigh those alternatives. Obviously, the essence of decision making is to select the right course of action. So you have to really look at them, talk about them, think again what's going to give you your most bang for your buck in trying to address this problem, because there may be multiple causes, but you're only going to address one thing at a time and put that in place. And once you do that, then you're going to make your choice. Then you implement that solution or that choice, put it into effect, and get it rolling. And of course, you're going to want to evaluate that after a period of time. You want to see if what you put in place as the solution has actually made any difference on the problem, or is the problem the same, or has the problem gotten worse. It could be either way. It takes time to evaluate, so make sure that you give enough time to the choice that you've implemented before you start looking for evaluation. Something has to be in place for a while to really see the results of whatever solution that you've put in place. If indeed you see that there's been no change, or it's made the problem even worse, then obviously that wasn't the right solution. And you're going to have to start again through the problem solving, decision-making steps. Or if you had 2 or 3 alternatives that y'all had ranked as, let's try this first, then this second, and this third, you could then go back and use one of your alternative solutions and implement that to see whether or not that would make a difference in the problem that you're having. I know it sounds kind of easy when you talk about it. If it's a massive problem or it's a software problem and you're trying to identify something technical, it really isn't as easy as it sounds sometimes. Plus, you have different people in the groups, and they all come at solving problems in a different way. You have different personalities. You have, people that have skin in the game because maybe they developed the software. So things cannot always go as well as you would like them to go when you're trying to work through troubleshooting a problem. However, it does pay in some cases to have an outside facilitator that is neutral to the team, actually facilitating this to keep everybody on track and keep them moving through the steps of the problem solving process. Now we're going to look a little bit at creativity in decision making, and that starts on page 154. And before we go there, I did want to mention, because you might find this interesting, on page 149 we have another self-assessment quiz. This particular one focuses on behaviors and attitudes that reflect good concentration and focus. So you might want to take this to see just how well you do concentrate and focus, or if maybe this is an area that you could do some improvement on. These are always fun, and they're just between you and the book, so they're always good to look at and give you some insight into yourself. If we go back to page 154, creativity is the ability to develop good ideas and put them into action. Flash of insight occurs about solving the problem. Okay, so your actual definition is the ability to develop good ideas that can be put into action. That is actually creativity. And then, in many cases, creative people they get like a flash of insight, and they have the ability to do this, and that is basically, as they're talking through things, comes into play, and in many cases is how they come up with solutions to solve the problems that they are trying to work on. Creativity can be taught, learned, and mastered. It's not something that's just innate and that you're born with. It's a skill. So anytime it's a skill, it can be taught, and it can also be enriched, and you can actually take what is good creativity and make it excellent creativity by working on that skill set. And I think the next bullet point says what I just said, that it's not really an inherited trait. It's a skill, or it's an activity. Creativity is highly valued in the workplace, and I hear it all the time, and I used to hear it from when I went out to corporate customer locations. Creativity and critical thinking. They just could not get people in that had those mindsets, and they really wanted that in the workplace. Creativity is so highly valued because it basically precedes innovation. Okay, and the definition for innovation in your book is on 154 out in the margin. Innovation, the commercialization or implementation of creative ideas. Okay, and so you need to be creative to even be innovative in terms of thinking about and coming up with new and different ideas or ways of doing things. Again, if you want to see just how creative you are, you need to look at page 155, because there is a creative personality test. And if you go through that and you score it according to what's given there, it will let you know just where you fall in the creativity bar. So, characteristics of creative workers. Okay, knowledge. Creative thinking requires a broad background of information. Knowledge supplies the building blocks for generating and combining these ideas. And creativity involves combining things in a new and different way. So you have to have the knowledge, and then in many cases the creativity takes that knowledge or takes those building blocks and just actually stacks them or moves them or does something different with them that then makes them very, very creative to try to give you a picture in your mind. Intellectual abilities. Okay, you must be good at generating alternative solutions to problems quickly. This is not something that in many cases you can take all day on. Sometimes if it's a big problem, it can go for a while, but sometimes immediate decisions have to be made about something that is happening now, and a decision has to be made in the next 5 minutes. So you don't always have the ability to pull a team together to go through things and make the decision that you want to make. A key to creative intelligence is insight, and that is basically defined as an ability to know when information is relevant, to find the connections between the old and the new, and to combine facts that are unrelated in order to see the big picture. So that's basically falls under your intellectual abilities, is that ability to have that insight to be able to see the big picture and combine things very quickly in your head. You must think divergently, but also be able to converge. Okay, that's pretty important when you're trying to come up with a decision. Personality. Creative people tend to have a positive self-image without necessarily, being boastful about it. They also have in some cases, creative self-efficacy, the belief that they have the knowledge and skills to actually come out with creative outcomes. Okay, so we've studied self-efficacy already. This is creative self-efficacy. They believe that they can produce a creative outcome based on their skills and their knowledge, which would be very helpful when you're trying to resolve something and come up with creative solutions. A study found that workers who expected their ideas to be accepted increased odds of their ideas being implemented. Well, that kind of makes sense. It's kind of self-fulfilling prophecy. If you feel positive, you're going to approach it positive, it's going to come out positive, and in many cases you're going to come out with some creative ideas that would be implemented. Creative people have the ability to tolerate the isolation necessary for developing ideas. They can sit all alone and be very, very creative and come up with all kinds of things. They don't need to have a team around them, and they don't need to have a group of people throwing out ideas. In fact, many creative people like to work on their own and like that isolation. Understand that it's not just a random situation. Okay? Creativity takes place when three conditions come together. And this is on page 157 in your book. First, expertise. You have to have the knowledge to put the facts together. Okay? Then creative thinking skills, being flexible, imaginative, approaching solving problems in a very different way, and of course perseverance to be able to continue to work through the issues. The right type of motivation. Passion for the task is more important than searching for external awards. They like being creative. They like resolving problems and making decisions, okay? They get totally absorbed in that task of creativity and trying to come up with creative and or alternative solutions to a problem. The external conditions necessary for creativity. An environmental need must stimulate the setting of a goal. Necessity is the mother of invention. For example, your book talks about independent hardware stores that were faced with the challenge of large chain stores years ago, like Home Depot and Lowe's, driving them out of business. Many of those independent stores survived by forming buying allowances with each other so they could purchase inventory in larger quantities, therefore at lower prices, because that's really what Lowe's and Home Depot have been able to do, because they're the big department store, hardware department store. They're able to buy in bulk and get lower prices. The little mom and pop shop can't really buy in bulk, nor would they want to store all of that inventory. But if they were smart and they worked with some of the other mom and pop shops, they would be able to buy larger numbers and get better prices. So sometimes you just have to think about it, and that is a very creative way to come up with trying to stay in the business and compete with the big dogs, so to speak. Enough conflict and tension to put people on edge. Conflict about ideas, not about people, but just enough of that conflict of the problem to be able to really make sure that people are excited about dealing with it. You know, they want to get it done. They want to come up with something creative. They want to defend their work. They want to be able to come up with ideas that would solve the issue. Encouragement, including a permissive atmosphere that welcomes new ideas. Obviously, you can't be creative if you're in a situation that does not welcome creativity and is not really fond of innovation. They're not flexible. They're more of a rigid environment, and that makes you not particularly want to be very creative, because obviously if you are, they're either not going to implement it, or if they do and it fails, then you're going to get your hand slapped for implementing something that didn't work. You have to understand that when something is creative, it may be the solution, but as with any solution, once it's implemented, you have to be able to track it and see whether it's really making the change or not, and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes you have to go back to the drawing board. So this is more of external conditions necessary for creativity to take place. Humor is a key environmental condition for enhancing creativity. Humor gets the creative juices flowing, and effective humor requires creativity. So obviously a positive mood often creates creativity in people. And in fact, most people are at their creative best when they're happy and in a good mood. People that aren't happy or in a work environment that is very stifling or micromanaged are probably not going to be very creative in terms of some of the things they come up with. And of course, permissiveness helps, because you can be really creative, but you know, as with any company, you must have some constraints. Creative can go all over the place. If money is part of the picture, you need to define up front that yes, we can implement a solution, but our solution has to stay within this dollar amount to be able to implement. Now sometimes that makes people be even more creative, because they have to come up with a truly interesting way of doing something to stay within the budget. So it just depends. So how can you improve your creativity? First of all, self-efficacy. Believe that you can be creative. Okay, you need to believe that you can be creative as part of getting to that point. Concentrate intensely on the task at hand, whatever that may be. Overcome what they call traditional mental sets, a fixed way of thinking about objects and activities. And this is in your book on page 159. And they give you, let's see if they give you a good example of that. Overcome traditional mental sets is important because the major block to creativity is to perceive things in a traditional way, okay? The way you've always thought about it, the way you've always approached it, the way you've always looked at it. And they talk about an effective way of overcoming this mental set is to challenge the status quo, or as you might hear in your work environment, you know, think outside the box, okay? Be creative, think outside the box. Don't do what we've always done before or follow that line of thinking, but come up with something that really is not something we've ever encountered or tried. Conduct brainstorming and brainwriting sessions. Brainstorming is a pretty standard procedure by which group members think of multiple solutions to a problem. But you know, you can brainstorm on your own if you're trying to resolve a problem. The good thing about brainstorming with a group is you have diverse personalities that are approaching it, problem solving, from different backgrounds, different values, and different ways, which can come up with some really great alternative solutions. Brainwriting, as they would call it, because you would write it down, is arriving at creative ideas by jotting them down by yourself. So you're brainstorming, but you're writing them all down on paper. That's brainwriting, so then you can later look at all of your possible solutions and, you know, weigh them and then make some kind of a decision. But all of this can help you improve your own creativity. Establish ideal quotas for yourself, okay? So you say, okay, I want to be more creative. I want to come up with the minimum of one really creative idea to implement in the workplace once a month or once a quarter or whatever that may be. And then, you know, that's the goal. And then you work toward the goal to try to come up with that. As you continue to do it, you'll find that what you're ending up doing eventually is coming up with more than just one idea. You're coming up with 3 or 4. It becomes easier and easier to come up with these things. Engage in multicultural experiences. Of course, that makes sense. You know, again, any interaction or encountering with multicultural countries, people, travel, whatever, is just going to open up your mind and, you know, gives you a wider berth of looking at things creatively. So it gives you direct access to novel ideas and concepts. The same behavior might serve different functions under different cultures or in different countries. New ideas might shake up your thinking, and you do see things done very differently in different places depending on the culture of the country. Readies you to recruit ideas from these new sources and synthesize seemingly incompatible ideas. Sometimes you wouldn't think of putting two things together, and when you start getting exposure to other cultures and other people and other ways of thinking, you start to see things a little differently than you previously did. Obtain adequate physical exercise. Physical movement stimulates the brain. Obviously, it brings in more blood and oxygen. Any reduction in stress helps concentration. So if you're trying to do something in work and you can't concentrate, you might want to go back to your cube, office, get a conference room, go somewhere where you could concentrate on what you were trying to do. Any flashes of insight, sometimes flashes of insight will occur while you're exercising. You'll want to make sure that you write that down or remember that, so that that is something you can bring to the drawing board when you get back into writing down the creative things that you want to implement. Solicit feedback on your performance. Feedback process can sharpen your imagination. So, as you're coming up with ideas or doing things, ask people what they think. Ask for feedback. They may think of something about your idea that you didn't think of, and that'll get you fired up to actually enhance it or remove something from it, whatever the case may be. Try creative problem solving when you are not at your best. Okay? Because when you're not at your best, your mind isn't filtering things like it would normally, because you're honestly, you're not thinking like you normally would. Okay? We're now on page 162. Play the roles of explorer, artist, judge, and lawyer. Okay? Be an explorer. Speak to people in other fields. Okay? You can always learn from other people and what they do. Be an artist by stretching your imagination, and you do this by asking what-if questions. What if we took on this new product? And what if we marketed it to only one area that we knew it would sell? And what if, okay, so be the artist, stretch your imagination. Know when to be a judge. In other words, evaluate wild ideas that are way out there and say, no, that's way out there. Okay? Make a sound decision, be critical. You don't want to discourage your creativity or your imagination, but you also don't want to you can throw those wild ideas out there, but sometimes they're not the best ideas that you want to implement. Achieve results by playing the role of lawyer. Negotiate and find ways to implement your ideas into your place of work. Okay? If you're the boss, sometimes it's easy to do that. If you're not, then when you come up with these creative ideas, talk to your boss or your team lead and tell them you've had a better idea on how to process certain paperwork, which would make it go faster and whatever, and explain it and show it and try to negotiate, trying to implement it at least, for 60 days or 90 days to evaluate whether indeed your idea has made a difference. So how does critical thinking relate to problem solving and creativity? Critical thinking, by the way, is solving problems and making decisions through a systematic evaluation of evidence. Okay? So you're actually looking at information, evidence, and actually going through it and doing an analysis before you actually, come up with a possible solution. Problem solving and creativity are part of critical thinking. They both are. Critical thinking evaluates evidence systematically, and it proceeds in 4 steps. We are on page 163. Step 1 is to have a healthy degree of skepticism about argument or proposition, or the proposition being presented. You don't want to be, way over the line one way or the other, but you do want to have just this healthy little dose of skepticism as you're going through to critically think and analyze what you're looking at. Step 2 is to evaluate stated or unstated assumptions, okay, that are underlying the argument or the presentation or the facts or the supportive information that's been given. Step 3 is to imagine and attempt to evaluate the arguments. And of course, step 4 is to make a decision. Critical thinking can be hampered by factors that influence problem solving and decision making. Situational factors, including the atmosphere of the company, also influence critical thinking. A person's emotional state can also alter or influence critical thinking. When we're way too emotional, whether it's negative or positive, we can't critically evaluate a situation. That's, like they say sometimes, when you're near and dear to the situation, you have to take a step away so that you can look at it more objectively. Sometimes that's hard to do when it's something that you feel very strongly about one way or the other. So you want to make sure that you're not trying to go through the steps of critical thinking when you're in a very emotional state, because you won't be real successful, or your solution that you arrive at may not be the best solution to implement. How critical thinking relates to problem solving and creativity. So this just kind of draws out what we just went through. Be skeptical about the argument or the position. Identify and evaluate the assumptions in the argument. So identify and evaluate if we're in problem solving. Okay, we're going to look at the identifying and evaluating the causes of the problem. Once you do that, then you're going to consider alternative arguments or look at different solutions and then weigh them, and then of course make a decision. So that's kind of what we covered, but in more of a visual diagram. Now let's talk about multiple intelligence and how they contribute to problem solving and creativity. This is on page 164 in your book. Okay, the theory of multiple intelligences suggests that people have different types of intelligences to call upon as needed to solve a particular problem. And those particular intelligences are the following: linguistics or language skills, logical, mathematical, such as calculus, musical, create meaning out of sounds, spatial, manipulate images, make graphic designs, bodily kinetics, good for dancing and sports, intrapersonal, distinguish among own feelings and acquire accurate self-knowledge, interpersonal, recognize feelings, motives, and intentions of others, naturalist, classify and utilize various features of the external environment. So basically, your profile of intelligences influences how you learn and to which types of jobs, in many cases, you're best suited. And based on that, it would also help you be more creative in some cases, because people have multiple intelligences. They have more than one of these. Be more creative when it comes to problem solving. It's just something that's covered in the book. There are people that have skills or these intelligences in more than one area, and when you have multiple ones, it basically helps with cognitive intelligence, and it contributes to a higher level of problem solving. That's page 165, and that kind of brings you through the problem solving and creativity end of things. Again, on page 166, and oh my goodness, my book went 166 to 160, oh no it didn't, to 167. You have a summary review, and as usual, their summary reviews are very good and to the point as to what was covered in the chapter. So you may want to review that and go through that before, of course, taking the quiz. But you can, read it in your book. You can listen to the PowerPoints, but they're all things that you might want to look at before moving forward.